camera caught it in stark detail. Kellyanne Conway, her face flushed with fury, leaning forward. Her voice slicing through the studio air like broken glass. Every word came out sharp, strained, desperate to dominate. The set, usually polished and controlled, suddenly felt like a battlefield. On one side, rage personified. On the other, silence. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her eyes locked forward, steady, unblinking, a calm ocean against the crashing waves of Conway's outburst. The contrast was cinematic. Chaos flailing on one side of the screen, composure carved in stone on the other. The red of Conway's face, the icy coolness in Crockett's posture, it was a painting of America's great divide. Live before millions. The anchors shifted nervously in their chairs, their professional smiles faltering. The studio light seemed hotter, harsher. Every gasp from the audience echoed the same question. Would Crockett break under the noise? Because that's what Kellyanne wanted. Volume over reason, dominance over dialogue, but silence can be louder than a scream. Crockett's stillness wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Her pause pulled the oxygen from the room. Every second she refused to react made Conway's shouting look smaller, pettier, more desperate. People watching at home felt it too, a hush settling into living rooms. Phones raised to record, fingers hovering over keyboards, ready to capture the viral birth of a moment. For decades, America has seen women of color talked over, shouted down, erased in conversations meant to be shared. But Crockett didn't lean back, didn't look away. She held her ground, her presence saying more in silence than Kellyanne could scream in a lifetime. And then, just as the noise reached its peak, just as Conway thought she'd claimed the stage, the world braced for what came next. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to match rage with rage. She was about to end it with something stronger, something colder, something unforgettable. But no one, not the anchors, not the audience, not even Kellyanne herself was prepared for the calm reply that would rewrite the moment. And the internet. Kellyanne Conway has made a career out of controlling rooms. For years, she wielded volume, wordplay, and relentless spin like weapons, cutting off opponents before they could find footing. Dazzling anchors with deflections, leaving audiences dazed and exhausted. She thrived in the storm she created, mastering the art of making chaos look like confidence. Too many, she was untouchable, the architect of distraction. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't built to be distracted. Her presence came from something deeper than sound bites and theatrics. Crockett carried the quiet strength of someone who had already weathered tougher storms than any studio meltdown. She wasn't there to trade talking points. She was there to embody truth. And truth doesn't need to yell. That's why this clash mattered. It wasn't just a women facing off under studio lights. It was a symbolic confrontation over the very soul of the national conversation. Who defines America's narrative? The seasoned manipulator who bends facts until they scream, or the unshaken voice who refuses to let arrogance pass for authority? As Conway screamed, her words felt less like arguments and more like a wall of noise. An attempt to drown out not just Crockett, but everyone Crockett stood for. Generations of silenced voices, dismissed perspectives, interrupted truths, they were all present in that moment. All waiting to see if dignity could finally hold its ground against distortion. Crockett didn't just represent herself. She represented communities tired of being talked over, tired of being caricatured, tired of watching rage win airtime while reason got cut to commercial. Every heartbeat in that studio was suddenly carrying the weight of a much larger fight. Could calm conviction shatter the illusion of power that noise creates? The stakes stretched far beyond television ratings. This wasn't about which clip would go viral, though everyone could sense the electricity of the moment. This was about America's relationship with truth itself. Conway's scream wasn't just an outburst. It was a test. If Crockett cracked, the old formula scream loud enough, control the story, would live another day. If she didn't, something far more seismic would unfold. And Crockett, with her steady gaze and unyielding posture, was about to flip the script in a way that no amount of spin could rewrite. because what happened next wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a reckoning on live television. Kellyanne Conway didn't stumble into the spotlight. She engineered her way into it. Long before she was a household name, she built her reputation as a pollster and strategist, carving a path through Washington with sharp elbows and sharper instincts. But it was during Donald Trump's 2016 campaign that she cemented her legacy. As campaign manager, she became the face of a political machine that thrived on disruption, outrage, and relentless noise. She was a pioneer of the spin cycle, not just answering tough questions, but flipping them back on the questioner. When challenged, she didn't falter. She leaned in. She made deflection an art form, coining the now infamous phrase alternative facts that came to symbolize her entire brand. To her allies, it was brilliant messaging. To her critics, it was dangerous gaslighting. Either way, it made her indispensable in an era defined by chaos. Conway's media persona became as recognizable as her name. Sharp, combative, often smirking as she tangled with anchors, she thrived on turning interviews into sparring matches. She didn't seek consensus. She sought dominance. In the glare of television lights, she was most comfortable when her opponents looked flustered and her voice carried louder than theirs. Her strategy wasn't subtle: overwhelm, interrupt, destabilize, and yet, beneath the polished exterior of her television appearances, there was a pattern that never went unnoticed. Her most cutting dismissals often came when she faced women of color. She wielded volume and ridicule like blunt weapons, brushing aside their perspectives with a sneer, a laugh, or an exaggerated shake of the head. For viewers who recognized the tactic, it wasn't just political theater. It echoed a long history of silencing voices that challenged entrenched power. Over time, Conway's tactics grew predictable, but never less effective. She embodied the notion that if you spoke loudly enough, long enough, and with enough bravado, the truth could be bent, buried, or bulldozed. In press gaggles and live interviews, her voice cut through like a blade, her confidence leaving little room for nuance or pause. She wasn't debating. She was dictating. This style won her admiration among those who saw politics as a blood sport, and disdain among those who longed for clarity and honesty. To her, however, disdain was proof of success. The louder the outrage, the stronger the impression. Conway lived in the arena where attention was power. No one could deny she had mastered it. But there was another truth lurking beneath her reputation. While Conway excelled at dominating the moment, she rarely won it with substance. Her legacy was not rooted in persuasion, but in disruption. Her power came not from building bridges, but from burning them, then walking confidently through the smoke as if it were victory. In the years after leaving the White House, her persona remained intact. She became a fixture of commentary, a reliable firebrand, always ready with a sharp line or a raised voice. For her fans, she was fearless. For her critics, she was shameless. For the media, she was ratings gold. And yet, there was an unmistakable fragility at the core of her strength, a reliance on volume. On performance, on the assumption that whoever yelled the loudest controlled the truth. Her arsenal was full of rehearsed lines, cutting comebacks, and a forceful delivery. But little in the way of humility or listening. That's what made her clash with Jasmine Crockett so charged. Here was Conway in her element, lights blazing, cameras rolling, voice rising, facing off against someone she thought she could rattle the way she had rattled countless others. She leaned on her old playbook, confident that noise would once again triumph over nuance. But in Crockett, she met a new kind of opponent, one who understood that silence could be sharper than screams, and that composure could be more devastating than chaos, because even the loudest scream sounds hollow when silence cuts sharper. Asterisk. Jasmine Crockett's story doesn't begin under the bright lights of Congress. It begins in the courtrooms of Texas, where the stakes were often life-altering for the clients who sat beside her, ordinary people facing extraordinary odds. She wasn't defending corporations or powerful interests. She was representing the kinds of people who couldn't afford to lose, because losing meant losing everything. It was there, in those tense rooms, that Crockett sharpened her craft, listening more than speaking, waiting for the precise moment to deliver a point so clear, so undeniable, that it left opponents scrambling for air. Her legal career wasn't glamorous. It was gritty, crowded with cases that most lawyers would avoid. She defended tenants pushed out by landlords, workers silenced by employers, citizens caught in the grinding gears of a system that rarely bent in their favor. The battles weren't just legal, they were personal. She saw firsthand how power could drown out truth, how voices without privilege were brushed aside as if they didn't matter. In that environment, Crockett learned the art of presence. When the world tried to shout you down, she discovered, the answer wasn't to shout louder, it was to speak with a weight that couldn't be ignored. From those beginnings, her path led her into politics, but the courtroom never left her. In Congress, she carried the same instincts she had honed as an attorney. Hearings became her new battleground, and her weapon was still precision. While others postured for sound bites, Crockett cut through with questions so exact, so razor-sharp, they forced evasive witnesses into corners. Colleagues took notice. Supporters began to rally. Slowly, she built a reputation, the freshman congresswoman who would not be shaken. Her presence resonated far beyond procedure. For countless communities, immigrants, women, Black Americans, working-class families, Crockett wasn't just speaking as a politician. She was speaking as one of them. Every time she stood tall against bluster, she carried the echoes of generations told to sit down, stay quiet, and accept their place. Her calm wasn't just composure. It was survival turned into strategy. It was the silence of ancestors who were denied platforms, transformed into the unshakable steadiness of someone who finally had one, and that steadiness was powerful. In hearings where tempers flared, she refused to match chaos with chaos. Instead, she let her opponents reveal themselves, unraveling as they mistook her calm for weakness. The longer they spoke, the clearer her strength became. Supporters watching from home recognized the tactic instantly. It was the way so many had survived boardrooms, classrooms, job interviews, and dinner tables where their voices were dismissed. Crockett wasn't just performing. She was reflecting lived reality, and in doing so, she validated it. But Crockett's journey was never without cost. Rising in politics meant enduring the dismissals, the condescension, the attempts to belittle her as too new, too inexperienced, or simply too much. Critics underestimated her, imagining that their volume could drown her out. What they missed was that Crockett's resilience had been forged long before politics. In spaces where the stakes weren't headlines, but human lives, by the time she sat behind a congressional microphone, she had already weathered storms far more dangerous than partisan bluster. For her supporters, this resilience became a symbol. They saw in her a leader who didn't just argue for justice, but embodied it in her very posture. When she leaned forward, calm and deliberate, it felt like centuries of silenced voices leaning forward with her. Every word she spoke carried more than her own conviction. It carried the weight of those who never had the chance to speak at all. This is why her clashes gained such resonance. They weren't just political skirmishes. They were cultural reckonings. Each time Crockett refused to be rattled, she turned a personal moment into a communal victory. Viewers felt pride surge in their chests, not because she humiliated her opponents, but because she made dignity look stronger than arrogance, and it was that dignity honed in Texas courtrooms, tested in congressional halls, carried on the shoulders of generations silenced before her, that she brought into the confrontation with Kellyanne Conway. Conway had built a career on overwhelming, on screaming, on bending narratives with sheer force. Crockett had built hers on stillness, on cutting clarity, on transforming survival into unshakable strength. The stage was set for a collision of two legacies, one rooted in noise, the other in truth. For a nation watching, the clash promised more than political theater. It promised a test of which force was stronger, the scream of power or the steadiness of justice, and that strength was about to meet. Conway's scream head-on. The exchange began like so many others before it, with Kellyanne Conway wielding her most familiar weapon, interruption. She leaned forward, voice pitched higher, slicing across Crockett's sentence like a blade. Naive, she sneered. Completely uninformed? Each word dripped with the same dismissive certainty that had once dazzled cable news panels and left anchors flustered. For Conway, this was home turf chaos volume. The command of space by sheer force of personality, but Crockett didn't flinch. She sat with her hands folded neatly, her expression unreadable, as though she were a judge silently waiting for counsel to finish their tantrum. Each interruption that Conway threw at her was met not with rebuttal, not with a desperate scramble to reclaim airtime, but with the stillness of someone who understood that silence itself could be an answer. The more Conway spoke, the more obvious the imbalance became. One woman red-faced and raging, the other unbothered, measured, waiting. The studio audience felt it. On one side, some nodded along to Conway's aggression, finding comfort in the familiar cadence of attack politics. To them, her volume was strength, her insults validation. But on the other side, there was a different kind of anticipation, people leaning forward, almost holding their breath, waiting for Crockett's answer. They weren't cheering yet. They were waiting for something heavier than applause. Conway sensed the divide, and rather than temper her approach, she doubled down. She spoke over the host, over Crockett, over the hum of the cameras. Her voice grew sharper, mocking Crockett's credentials, her experience, her very right to sit at the table of national debate. "This is why you people don't get it," Conway snapped. Her words laced with the smugness of someone convinced they'd already won, and still, Crockett didn't bite. Her calm deepened, her pauses longer, her eyes colder. Every second she remained composed made Conway's aggression seem louder, harsher, almost unhinged. Viewers at home could feel the contrast. One voice clawed for dominance, desperate to control the narrative. The other embodied a steadiness that didn't need control, because it already commanded the room without raising its volume. This contrast became unbearable for Conway. She wasn't used to opponents refusing to play her game. She thrived on reaction, the flustered retort, the angry defense, the scramble to be heard. Without it, her words seemed to echo back, bouncing into a void that only highlighted their hollowness. Each jab she threw landed not on Crockett, but in empty air, dissipating as quickly as it came, and that's when the energy shifted. What began as a clash of words became something larger, a duel of legacies. Conway's rise had been fueled by her ability to bend reality through repetition and spin, while Crockett's strength had been forged in spaces where truth itself was survival. Now, in this moment, those legacies collided, and the chamber itself seemed to hold its breath. For the first time, Conway's voice cracked. Her scream, sharp, desperate, unrelenting, reached its peak. She leaned so far forward, it seemed as though the camera itself might recoil. Every syllable carried not confidence, but panic, the frantic energy of someone realizing that their volume no longer commanded fear. And in that instant, Crockett moved. Her lips parted, her voice cutting through the chamber with a calm that was colder, heavier, more devastating than any scream. The contrast was so stark it jolted the room, as though a storm had suddenly given way to an unnerving silence. Then came the breaking point. Conway's scream reached its peak, and Crockett finally answered. For a moment, silence reigned. It wasn't the comfortable kind, nor the empty pause that follows technical delays. It was heavier, charged, as if every eye in the studio and every pair of ears glued to the broadcast knew something had shifted. The scream had peaked, the storm had raged, and now Jasmine Crockett began. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't match Conway's frenzy. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her tone low but unmistakably clear, every word carefully sculpted. "You know," Kellyanne Conway said, her cadence deliberate, almost surgical, "I've been called a lot of things in my career. Naive, uninformed, angry, too ambitious, too bold. But do you know what I've never been called? Wrong about the facts." A ripple ran through the audience. A faint murmur, the kind of sound that signals people shifting in their chairs, realizing they are witnessing not just debate but a dismantling. Crockett continued, her voice steady. "Because when we talk about leadership in America, when we talk about the future of this country. We aren't talking about how loud someone can scream or how many insults they can pile up in 30 seconds. We're talking about results. We're talking about the truth. Her hands unfolded gently, palms facing upward. Not in surrender, but an invitation to listen, to weigh, to consider. You came into fame, Kellyanne, selling the world on something you yourself once admitted was an illusion. Alternative facts. A phrase so shameless it became a punchline. But here's the thing about alternative facts. They aren't facts at all. And the people who live with the consequences of those lies, they're sitting in my district. They're standing in food bank lines. They're the ones burying loved ones when rhetoric turns into policy. When spin becomes law, gasps broke out, sharp intakes of breath audible even on camera mics. Conway's smile faltered just slightly, but enough to be caught in the close-up. She attempted to speak, to lunge back into the fray, but the host lifted a hand and Crockett, unhurried, pressed on. You call me naive. But naive would be believing that shouting down women of color makes their truths any less valid. Naive would be thinking this country hasn't seen through that tactic already. Naive would be assuming that dignity is weakness. It isn't. Dignity is a discipline. And some of us were trained in it long before you ever stepped onto a stage. The words landed like gavel strikes. Conway opened her mouth again, but now every attempt to interrupt seemed to fall flat. Crockett's rhythm was too strong, her calm too magnetic. It wasn't just that she was speaking facts, it was that her tone carried the weight of lived experience. Of communities who had fought too long to be erased by volume, she pivoted, grounding her argument in history. This isn't new. History is full of people who believed shouting down justice would silence it. George Wallace screamed. Joe McCarthy screamed. Segregationists screamed. And yes, they had their moments on television too. But history didn't remember their volume. History remembered the people who answered with clarity, with courage. With calm, the audience erupted into a murmur again, some clapping, some gasping, others simply staring in awe. The camera caught one young woman in the front row, covering her mouth, eyes wide as though realizing she'd just seen a moment destined for replay. Conway tried once more to insert herself. That's not, she began, her tone sharp, but Crockett did not so much as glance in her direction. Instead, she carried on, her voice steady, never rising. And here's what really matters, Crockett said. You can scream about me, you can insult me, you can even try to drown me out. But what you cannot drown out are the voices I carry with me. The single mother who worked 3 jobs to put her child through school. The veteran who fought for a country that sometimes forgets his sacrifice. The immigrant who believed America was worth the risk. They don't have megaphones on cable television. They have me, and I will not raise my voice over yours tonight. Because their voices are already louder than both of us. The studio broke into scattered applause, unplanned. Unscripted, the kind of spontaneous reaction that broadcasters dread because it signals a loss of control, but which viewers at home instantly recognize as authenticity. Conway shifted uncomfortably, the familiar grin straining. Unable to mask the frustration simmering beneath, Crockett let the moment breathe. Then delivered the line that would become the headline, the hashtag. The viral clip, replayed millions of times. Screaming doesn't make you stronger. It only makes you louder. And tonight, America can hear the difference. The eruption was immediate. Applause now thundered through the studio. Some in the audience stood, clapping with the unrestrained energy of people who knew they'd be bragging about being present at this exact moment. The host, visibly stunned, allowed the applause to wash over the set. For a rare few seconds, live television gave way to raw human reaction. And Conway, she fell silent. For perhaps the first time in years, the woman who built a brand on always having the last word had nothing left to say. Every attempted rebuttal, every sharp quip, every preloaded talking point evaporated into the air. Because how do you scream over silence when silence carries the truth? Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply folded her hands once more, posture unbroken. As if the mic drop hadn't just happened, but had always been inevitable. The moment hung suspended, electric, alive with the awareness that something larger than a television segment had just unfolded. A clash of personalities had become a clash of principles. Chaos had met composure and lost, but the story wasn't finished. Because the real shockwaves weren't in that studio, they were about to explode across America. Asterisk. The clip didn't just air, it detonated. Within minutes of the broadcast, Twitter lit up like a switchboard sparking to life. Hashtags stacked up so quickly they began competing for dominance. Hashtag Crockett.com, hashtag Conway Meltdown, hashtag viral reply. Millions of viewers clipped the moment, adding captions, slow-motion replays. Even cinematic music overlays to highlight the exact second Kellyanne Conway's scream evaporated into silence against Jasmine Crockett's unshaken calm. TikTok flooded with edits. Some showed side-by-side comparisons. Conway's red face on one side, Crockett's still gaze on the other, looping endlessly as text above read. Chaos versus composure. Others layered Crockett's words over powerful imagery. Civil rights marches. Women raising their fists. Students in protest transforming her calm rebuttal into a rallying cry for dignity itself. Instagram Reels leaned into humor. One popular meme stitched Crockett's line, "Screaming doesn't make you stronger. It only makes you louder," over footage of toddlers throwing tantrums in grocery store aisles. Another paired Conway's scream with the screech of a malfunctioning fire alarm, only to cut abruptly to Crockett's serene delivery. The comedic exaggerations didn't diminish the seriousness of the moment. They amplified it, showing how perfectly Crockett's composure had punctured the chaos. Late-night hosts pounced. Stephen Colbert replayed the exchange, joking. Kellyanne brought the scream. But Jasmine brought the receipts. Jimmy Fallon mimicked Conway's shrill outburst, then sat silently to reenact Crockett's calm, drawing roars of laughter from his audience. On The Daily Show, a montage ran of Conway's past chaotic interviews, culminating in Crockett's poised reply, framed as the finally enough is enough moment America had been waiting for. But beyond comedy, analysts weighed in with surprising seriousness. Commentators across political networks admitted it wasn't just another TV spat. It was a cultural collision. This moment represents a pivot, one CNN analyst noted. For years, Conway has mastered the art of spinning outrage into dominance. But Crockett just showed the nation what happens when you refuse to play that game. On MSNBC, a guest declared, "It's dignity over chaos. Substance over spectacle, and people are starved for it, even on platforms not usually drawn into politics." The clips surged. Sports accounts tweeted, "Crockett 1, Conway 0. Lifestyle influencers used the hashtags to talk about boundaries, emotional regulation, and the power of not matching someone's volume. A viral tweet read, "Every woman of color in America knows this tactic. They scream, they dismiss, they ridicule. And then you answer, calmly, with truth. And they have nowhere to go." It garnered over 500,000 likes. The scale was breathtaking. By the end of 24 hours, Crockett's reply had been viewed over 20 million times across platforms. Hashtags trended globally. News sites rushed to write think pieces. Some headlines framed it as political theater, others as a generational clash. But one theme kept repeating: the scream lost, the calm won. Conway's camp scrambled to spin. Anonymous sources whispered to reporters that the meltdown was exaggerated, that Conway was merely passionate, yet every replay, every meme, every parody undercut that narrative. Passion hadn't been the takeaway. Desperation had. Meanwhile, Crockett didn't post victory laps. She released a single statement on X. "This isn't about me. It's about respect, truth, and the America we deserve. Always choose calm over chaos." The post itself went viral, screenshot and shared across timelines as evidence that her composure wasn't just a performance. It was who she was. And so, the debate transformed into something larger than two women on a stage. It became symbolic. To millions, it was the reckoning of two Americas, one shouting, spinning and ridiculing its way through the truth, and another holding steady, insisting that dignity has its place in public life. Yet as the applause rolled on, as the jokes multiplied, as the hashtags topped charts, something quieter began to take shape. Beneath the laughter, beneath the relief of seeing a scream finally silenced, viewers began asking themselves a deeper question. If composure could dismantle chaos this cleanly in a TV studio, what else could it dismantle in the halls of power? And that question, whispered in living rooms, debated in podcasts, scrawled across op-eds, marked the beginning of a new reckoning. Cliffhanger, yet beneath the laughter and applause. A deeper question began to stir. Asterisk, when the noise finally settled, Crockett didn't seize the moment to gloat. She didn't bask in the applause or lean into the viral storm. Instead, she did something more profound. She reframed the entire encounter. To her, this wasn't about humiliating Kellyanne Conway or about proving who could land the sharper blow. It was about showing America that volume isn't the same as validity, and that noise, no matter how loud, does not equal truth. In interviews that followed, Crockett spoke with the same measured clarity that had defined her on stage. This was never about shouting someone down, she said softly. It was about standing firm in what's real. Screams fade. Calm endures. That single phrase became the heartbeat of the moment, circulating across platforms, shared on placards at rallies, repeated in classrooms and workplaces alike. People weren't just quoting Crockett, they were living by her example. The emotional weight of her response carried a universal resonance. For women who had been dismissed in boardrooms, for immigrants who had been talked over in classrooms, for workers whose voices were drowned out in meetings, Crockett embodied something larger than herself. She became a living reminder that composure can be an act of defiance, that calm can carry the weight of entire histories, and that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. The contrast landed with surgical precision. Conway's chaos, the scream, the red face, the spiraling attempt to dominate the space, seemed to wither under replay. It aged poorly with every viewing, becoming a caricature of itself. Crockett's composure, on the other hand, aged like stone, solid, immovable, timeless. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Eyes steady, pauses intentional. The cadence of a leader who understood that endurance, not eruption, defines strength. Commentators pointed to the moment as a microcosm of the American dilemma. Are we a nation that rewards chaos? One op-ed asked. Or are we a nation that recognizes dignity as the truer form of power? For once, the viral discourse didn't spiral into shallow distraction. It went deeper. Podcasts, essays, late-night debates returned again and again to the lesson Crockett had crystallized. Calm is not weakness. It is resilience. It is survival turned into strength. Even Conway's defenders struggled to reframe the meltdown as passion. The contrast was too stark. Viewers could see it, feel it. Passion uplifts, inspires, unites. Screaming to silence another person? That was something else entirely, something desperate. Crockett hadn't needed to raise her voice. She didn't need to drown anyone out. Her power lay in showing that composure itself could cut sharper than any scream. And so a cultural lesson emerged. The viral clip wasn't remembered as Conway's scream. It was remembered as Crockett's calm. That distinction mattered. It shifted the ownership of the moment from the one who tried to dominate it to the one who transformed it. Crockett didn't just survive the confrontation. She defined it. For millions watching, the moral clarity felt refreshing, even restorative. In an age of noise, endless punditry, constant outrage, algorithms amplifying the loudest voices, Crockett had modeled something revolutionary, the power of stillness. Her restraint had exposed the fragility of chaos, the hollowness of arrogance. It was a reminder that dignity doesn't just resist the storm, it outlasts it. And yet, as the clip continued to spread, as the hashtags glowed across screens, one question lingered. It echoed in living rooms, in classrooms, in cafes, and on comment threads. A question that reached beyond the clash of two women on a stage and into the soul of the nation itself, and for millions watching. One question echoed long after the clip ended. Who truly defines America's voice? Asterisk, when the dust finally settled, one truth stood unshakable. Kellyanne Conway may have screamed, her voice echoing across the studio, but it wasn't her noise that history remembered. It was Jasmine Crockett's .com, steady, unflinching. It's defined the moment. If you felt that surge of justice when her words cut through the chaos, you weren't alone. Millions across the country felt it too. They saw in Crockett's composure the kind of leadership that doesn't need to shout, the kind of strength that doesn't rely on volume. They felt pride, they felt validation, and they felt hope. Because this wasn't just a TV clash. It was something far more important, a reminder that dignity outshines arrogance every single time. And in a world where chaos so often drowns out truth, moments like these become more than entertainment. They become lessons. They become proof. That's why this community exists, to spotlight those moments. To give voice to stories where truth rises above noise, where respect defeats ridicule, where calm endures. And if you're here watching this, you are already part of that movement, so don't let it stop here. Subscribe, share this story, and invite others into the circle. Because every voice that joins makes the message louder. Dignity will not be silenced. No matter how loud arrogance screams. This wasn't just a clash between two figures on a screen. It was a reflection of who we are and who we want to be as a nation. And as the clip replayed across America, it reminded us of one thing above all, because this wasn't just a clash, it was a reminder of who really speaks for America.